My name is Abby, and today we're going to cover a couple of topics. Number one is some stats about eating disorders in men, and number two is some common misconceptions about eating disorders as well. Eating disorders is something I talk about quite a lot on this channel, and that's not from the point of view of like a professional or therapist. It's purely from the point of view of someone that's experienced it and someone that's tried to kind of work his way through it without getting any extra help. By the way, if you like my content, please remember to hit the subscribe button. And it's really common still to see quite a few misconceptions about what eating disorders actually are, especially when it comes to eating disorders in men. We're going to start with some common misconceptions about eating disorders, and then we'll look at some stats about eating disorders in men. So first of all is the idea that eating disorders only affect women or only affect young girls. And that's completely untrue. They can affect anyone regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of background, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of pretty much anything. The UK eating disorder charity called AbhiG estimates that 300,000 males in the UK have an eating disorder, and of those, it's estimated 191,000 are over 35 years old. By the way, any stats I'm referring to, I will include a link to where I got this from in the description. Young girls and women aged 10 to 25 with anorexia make the largest single sort of bracket of people with eating disorders, but it's definitely not the majority. Anorexia isn't even the most common eating disorder, and it's definitely not the only group that gets eating disorders. It's also a common assumption that everyone with an eating disorder is massively underweight. According to the stats I found, only 6% of eating disorders are clinically underweight. Next up is one that's very specific to binge eating disorder, and I purely bring this one up because binge eating disorder is the most common one, and it's the one that I've had the most sort of direct experience with for the longest period of time. But it's the idea that everyone with binge eating disorder is just overweight and lazy. Throughout my time with binge eating disorder, my BMI stayed at a healthy weight range. I actually lost some weight while I had binge eating disorder. If you are prone to binge eating disorder, then yes, weight gain is likely and it's not uncommon, but that doesn't mean it comes from a lack of willpower or from laziness. It's not really something that you'll appreciate until you've been in that feeling in the middle of a binge where you just felt completely helpless. And it's very much possible to have binge eating disorder and it have nothing to do with weight, and it also have no impact on your weight. And last one, the one that probably worried me a little bit, because I guess it kind of applies more broadly to other mental health conditions as well, is the idea that eating disorders are a choice, and that people say that you are putting yourself through this deliberately to achieve a certain body image or a certain body shape. Yes, some people go for extreme diets for a certain reason like that, but an eating disorder is a genuine mental health condition and it doesn't have an on-off switch. You either have it and you're dealing with it, or you don't have it. And even within the case of having an eating disorder, there is a spectrum in terms of how much it affects your life, how intense your behavior patterns are, and how intense the emotions attached to those behaviors are. There's no one single cause or trigger, and everyone's a little bit different, but it's very definitely not a choice. The sufferers don't really have like control over it in that way. So coming back to eating disorders in men, eating disorders are normally thought of as a predominantly female thing. I think in terms of numbers, women do get affected by it more than men. There's still a sizable number of men around the world who do have eating disorders. And I did pull up some stats. I'm relying on stats from the UK charity called Beat, and I've included a link in the description for my sources here. So they estimated that 1.25 million people in the UK have eating disorders, and they estimated that just under 25%, around 300,000, are male. Now, when looking at stats for eating disorders in men, I always think about my own experience of not really understanding that men could have eating disorders, and I always wonder to what extent men or males are underreporting and not getting help. So it's very much possible that the actual number of males with an eating disorder is higher than that. Another site, which didn't quote their own source for this stat, said that as high as 1 in 3 eating disorder sufferers could be male. In the US, the National Association of Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders estimated that as many as 9% of Americans, so that's both male and female, will get an eating disorder at some point in their lifetime. You can see from the stats that eating disorders are not uncommon, and eating disorders in men in particular are not uncommon. There's so many other directions you can go off of in terms of stats just to understand how sort of widespread the problem with eating disorders is. First of all, like I said, less than 6% of people diagnosed with an eating disorder are clinically underweight. That very much goes against the stereotype of people with eating disorders always being very skinny or, severely underweight. A person of color is less than half as likely as someone who's white to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. Gay men are 7 times more likely to binge eat and 12 times more likely to purge than a heterosexual man. Purging, by the way, means either taking laxatives or trying to induce vomiting or excessive exercise to try and remove the food that you've eaten from your body. In the US college age range, transgender people are 4 times as likely as a cisgender person to have an eating disorder. 20 to 30% of adults with an eating disorder are also on the autism spectrum. In the US, it was estimated that over 10,000 deaths each year result directly from an eating disorder. And the one stat that really hit me hard was that 26%, so more than 1 in 4 people, 26% of people with an eating disorder will attempt suicide. So yeah, it's a widespread issue. It affects a hell of a lot of people. It can have life-changing and life-ending consequences in some cases. If it's something you're doing, please don't be ashamed. Please just reach out and get some help. If you have any comments, any questions, any feedback, want me to direct you to some support, please feel free to drop something in the comments and I'll do what I can.